Good afternoon, this is Jeff with Sewer Tech Northwest. We are at 7401 South Corbett Avenue here in Portland, located at the, if you're standing in the street facing the front of the house, this part of the house face out of the road here, we are on the right side of the house, just outside the kitchen here on the bottom floor, kind of between the kitchen and the little pergola area. So you've got a 4-inch ABS cleanout. There's also one adjacent to me here too. We'll figure out what that is in a second. It might be storm tied in. There also could be a line coming out of this garage potentially. Anyway, we're going to insert the camera and check the overall condition, serviceability of the sanitary sewer line. Off we go. I imagine we're going to have quite the steep downhill run here. So from the sounds of it, it sounds like there might be some kind of offset joint or something of that nature somewhere in the line here. And we will take a look at that. On a hillside this steep, not that an offset can't theoretically cause a problem. On hillsides like this, where you have this much slope and grade to your line, unless the offset is horrific, or is also open to the ground where it's sucking dirt through it, where you're going to have a progressive settling situation, your line could be about made of Swiss cheese on a hillside like this and it's still going to function. I mean, the amount of lines I've cambered over the 13 years in the hills where every pipe joint has a root intrusion through it, most of them never amount to anything because the amount of gravity that is working with the line just has stuff shooting through it so quickly. Even if a blockage did occur, the amount of head pressure that develops filling up a line on a hillside this steep is immense. So anyway, we'll see. And I think we're approaching that spot here right now. And we're going to come back and take a second look at that when the line's fully drained out there. I can tell you've got some shifting that took place there. No doubt about it. From a flow standpoint though, my bigger concern on something like that is it going to progress and get worse? What you don't want to have happen is the line settles so badly that the line basically closes itself off. We'll revisit that here in a minute though. Yeehaw! That is just a water slide. My camera's about pulling itself to the line. This is an incredibly steep line. Just swapped over to 3034 PVC. Now we're into clay pipe, back over to 3034. And there's the main lateral at about 148 feet. We're going to let the line drain out here for a minute. From a flow standpoint, even with the offset joint right now, this line is, everything's ripping back up as it sits right now. But we will take a look at that joint again here. The big thing is checking to see if the joint is exposed to the ground. That's a different story entirely. Alright, line's all drained out here at this point. We're going to start reeling back in. This thing's insane. I mean, you turn the water off and it drains out completely in about 15 seconds. Most lines that are 150 feet long take minutes to drain out. So you've had a little there. The joint is closed off. There's a Fernco that holds those joints together. They do allow for some movement without separating open to the ground. That one is closed off. I'm not entirely sure why that little piece of pipe was left in the ground there, but I'm sure there was probably a reason. Sometimes you get just a section of pipe that is, when you go digging into the ground, you often have a myriad of different utilities that are around sewer lines, over top, underneath them, and adjacent to them. And sometimes, if the pipe's in good shape, clay pipe can last, quite literally thousands of years. The material itself just does not wear out. It's a brittle product, so if it gets smacked or something like that, it can crack. It's like glass. Otherwise, if it's in good shape and still doing its job, they'll often leave it in the ground if it's risking damaging some of the utility in the process of excavating it out or something of that nature. So that's often why stuff like that occurs. And whoever's living here is doing a great job of keeping cooking oil and grease out of the line. This is a spotless, clean sewer line. And this line does not have the same problems the average slope sewer line would with grease buildup. It's still a good idea to try and mitigate that. Keep it out of your line. And we're getting close to that pipe joint here, and we're going to take a look at it. And I would also recommend looking into the prospect of an epoxy liner too. If this could be closed off and sealed up with a liner, I would highly recommend looking into that. Working on hillsides like this is never an easy thing to do. And there's always a concern in the process of doing that you may undermine something, you know, so it's worth looking at. The amount of diameter loss you've got here is minimal. You couple that with the amount of slope this thing has, you know, you've still got a pretty good size opening for stuff to get through. In an ideal world, though, you adjust it properly. And so what I am seeing here that I'm not seeing anywhere else in the line, if you look at the top of the sewer pipe there, and if you go back and watch the video coming all the way back to this point, if you notice the top of the pipe there, you've got what looks like some little spots of dirt. So this one does appear to be exposed to the ground. If you look anywhere else in the line, you have nothing that looks anywhere similar to the spotting you have at the top there, and the amount that is pulled apart, it's not surprising that you're getting stuff migrating through there. So from that standpoint, that's why I concur with the last recommendation of a repair here. Again, as it sits right now, this is hardly doing anything to affect functionality, but this does appear with time, and you don't want to have that happen. You've lost about 1.5 inches or so of diameter here. The way it's offset, though, stuff is just kind of dropping through right now with little issue, but that's one that I highly suspect will continuously shift, and eventually you're going to have a line that closes itself off here. So anyway, that's one that is worth getting repaired and fixed up. And taking a second look at this now, the amount that is shifted, as much as I love to see epoxy liners done, I don't think this is an ideal candidate for it. I think this is one that should be done by excavation to fully correct that joint, line back up properly. And I highly recommend you rescope the sewer line after the repair is done. It's very important to do that, and you want to do your rescope after the line is buried, when the trench is closed up. All this stuff is in theory until you put weight on top of it. This joint, for instance, probably would have looked perfect had you scoped the line or took a look at it when the trench was open. And that's often when these things are permitted and inspected by the city. But it's not until after you put a whole bunch of weight on top of it you get to see if it's actually going to stay put or not. Alright, we got that located. So this is down in the, you've got the flat part, the largest part of the front yard. It's all flattened out. This is probably about 10 feet before you hit the edge of that hill, before you start to go down the really steep slope at the front of the property. Luckily, this looks like it's in a flat part, a little bit easier area to work. I've put a green X marking down here. I'm not putting a depth on the ground. This is one that I highly recommend relocating before doing any digging. As much time as I've been doing this, I at least know that locators out there for locating on steep slopes like this, or at least steep sloped lines. Sometimes that can throw the locator off a little bit. I'm getting around 6 feet deep here. Anyway, recommend a repair on that one and a rescope to check the work afterwards. And real quick before I take off here, I'm going to drop into this 4-inch clean out. What this likely is here, this is the one that's on the other side of the walking path. And I knocked on the cap. You can hear it echo through the line, through the other clean out. So they are tied together, which makes sense. So it's possible you could have a combination of storm and sewer here. The other thing that also makes a lot of sense, especially, I can tell that these people put some thought into this place when they redid stuff, and we're going past the spot we've already been past. I recognize that joint already. That joint just wasn't butted all the way home there. There's nothing wrong with it. It's intact. Anyway. But it wouldn't surprise me one bit if that garage area up here is already pre-plumbed. They may have run a stub to it so that if you wanted to add bathrooms into it to make it a livable space, from the looks of it, I think it's set up for that. But you'd have to look at drawings. I don't even think I have access to the inside of it right now to see if they have any pipe in there that's kind of stubbed off and kind of ready to be added onto. So, and that piece of pipe looks good. It's got super hard slope and grade to it. Nothing's going on there at all. So as the line currently sits right now, just from simply a flow standpoint, the line is functioning nicely at this time, even with the offset. Again, and most of that is related to how steep this line is. If this were a regular flat running sewer line like your average house would, that offset there would be a much larger concern in the immediate. But I am indeed concerned about how that is going to hold up over time, and the progressiveness. Predicting how quickly that'll happen is very difficult to do. So it's one of those that I would recommend getting on it sooner rather than later because of what can occur. It can not only, hydro erosion can not only affect the sewer line, but it can also affect the surrounding landscape. You don't want to start having your yard, especially on a hillside, you don't want to start having your yard, having erosion issues and things like that. So from that standpoint, that's why I'm recommending the repair here today. I think it's a good idea to make sure this line's bolstered up and it doesn't progressively shift over time and cause problems. So functioning nicely as it sits right now as far as flow goes, but because of the way that the joint does appear to be exposed to the ground, it is not a completely intact watertight sewer line as it sits right now. Highly unlikely that sewage is escaping. What generally happens, unless a joint is just gaping wide open to the ground, generally what's migrating through the joint is groundwater and dirt under hydraulic pressure. When the ground is saturated with water especially, it swells up and starts to push that stuff through the pipe joints. So it's very unlikely that sewage is escaping the line here. I don't see any signs of that happening, and you rarely will get that unless a joint is just wide open to the ground where you can look straight through the pipe joint and see dirt. Anyway, make sure that rescope takes place after the trench is closed. Very important to do that. The rest of the line here looks good. Again, you have that little piece of clay out in the street there. A little bit of movement or slippage has taken place at one of those joints, but that joint is sealed. There's no evidence that it's open to the ground whatsoever. So everywhere else is looking good.